And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are the best cards from Battle for Baldur's Gate, in my opinion, for the Commander format. I have talked quite a bit about things I don't like from this set. There is a bunch. There's a lot I like from the set as well. As a Commander Legends set, right? You think about the original Commander Legends set, it was phenomenal. It was probably the best set ever for Commander. Lots of great commanders, lots of great cards. I don't think this set lives up to that reputation. It's definitely not as good. I've talked about backgrounds quite a bit already, not the hugest fan of them. The funny thing is I was looking at them and I really didn't find a lot of backgrounds that matched up really good with the background commanders. A lot of them don't really seem to fit together at all, because you have background commanders that have a very general archetype that they're fitting into, and then a background that is mostly just affecting your commander. So not a lot of great matches there. The best one I could find is Inspiring Leader with maybe Halcyon Emerald Archdruid, because you're dealing with a token theme there, so giving a lot of your tokens a bump. I mean, Selesnya tokens is already really popular theme. There's lots of Selesnya token commanders already. Again, I'm just looking at these and thinking they're probably better in the 99 of a lot of those decks, right? So, I mean, obviously you could just use the backgrounds to match up the colors that you want, like a lot of people do with partners. They just use those backgrounds to get the colors that they want in their deck, but I don't really love that idea either, to be quite honest. Like, let's look at a commander like Volo Itinerant Scholar, for example, 2 and a blue human wizard, 2/3. When Volo enters the battlefield, create Volo's Journal, a legendary colorless artifact token with hexproof, and whenever you cast a creature spell, note one of its creature types that hasn't been noted for this artifact. Then you can pay 2 and tap, draw a card for each creature type noted for target permanent you control named Volo's Journal. Very confusing way that they did this. It essentially is very similar to the original Volo, the blue-green version, which is a great commander. They tried to take it a different way with this. And of course it has choose a background, and I thought, well, what if I wanted to make a Volo deck similar to the original one, a blue-green version, right? What if I wanted to add green to this commander, which would probably be one of your best options? What background would I use? And I looked at all the green backgrounds and there really wasn't any that fit what this was doing at all. I mean, I thought Master Chef, 2 and a green, legendary enchantment background, commander creatures you own have this creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it, and other creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. I guess that, you know, maybe fits. So you're not doing a +1/+1 counter theme, but if you need the green, it does kind of fit because you're playing lots of creatures. So I just thought it was weird. I thought for sure they were going to have backgrounds that fit really, really well with the background commanders, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of great matches, in my opinion. If you guys have discovered a really great one, let me know in the comments below, but I just found that a lot of the backgrounds worked really well with other commanders, non-background commanders, and that the background commanders actually worked a lot better in the 99 of a lot of decks. So I don't know. That's just my opinion on the matter. But let's get to the actual cards that I really like from this set, and of course the ones that I think are going to see play. So let's start out with some honorable mentions here, and these are some artifacts that are sort of in the ramping category. Navigation Orb, 3 mana artifact, pay 2 and tap, sacrifice Navigation Orb, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and or gate cards, reveal those cards, put one of them onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand. So this is a cultivate, Kodama's Reach type of effect, but a colorless option. Obviously it's more expensive, it's slower, of course it is. It's a colorless option, but I think this card is going to see play. Not only is it a colorless ramp option, but it can also get gates, which in a way can mana fix you, right? So this is going to be a very budget option, I think, for a lot of people to be ramping, and obviously a colorless option as well. So I think it is going to see play. Like if you compare this to Burnished Heart, which is a very popular card in the format, it is comparable to what they're doing, right? Decanter of Endless Water is another option here. 3 mana artifact that taps to add 1 mana of any color, and you have no maximum hand size. So again, this is just another nice, maybe budget option if you don't want to put Thought Vessel in there, and a lot of people will play Thought Vessel for the fact that it's a 2 mana rock, but other people play it because they actually really want the no maximum hand size thing, and this is another option for you. Again, it's a 3 mana rock, but having that no maximum hand size on your mana rock can be really handy. And the last one I'll talk about here is Patriarch's Seal, 3 3 mana artifact. Again, taps to add 1 mana of any color, and you can pay 1 and tap, untap target legendary creature you control. That can be really, really handy in a lot of decks, right? I think it would be worth it. If you had a creature that has a really great tap ability, for example, it might be worth it for you to put this in your deck in the mana rock slot, because then being able to untap your commander can be really, really handy for you if your commander has that great tap ability. Getting to the actual list though, coming in at number 20, Arenicus's Vial Duplication. 3 and a blue sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except the token has flying and it isn't legendary. If that creature is legendary, this card's going to see play in the format without question. People are always looking for other options to create token copies of their commanders, right? To get that extra effect off of their commander. This is another option. It also gives flying without question. This is going to see play in the format, so I got to give it a mention. Next up, we have Cloud Kill. 4 black sorcery. All creatures get -X until end of turn, where X is the greatest mana value of a commander you own on the battlefield or in the command zone. I kind of like this. Now, I think that black is actually kind of limited on the board wipes that they have access to. I know people are going to think I'm wrong on that, but if you get past Toxic Deluge and Damnation, which are actually really, really expensive, a lot of people can't afford to put those in their decks. It really drops off heavily from there, and I think Cloud Kill is a pretty decent option, obviously dependent on what your commander is. Now, you could go the route of, I have my A Name Is 1 deck, which I might put this in there. Obviously, my commander costs 12, so this is going to be -12 to all creatures. That's going to get everything. And again, it's getting around indestructible. It's getting around a lot of stuff. Can't regenerate, all that good stuff. Just going to wipe the board completely. For 6 mana, I think that's pretty good. But also an interesting way to use this card, I think, is if your commander has a toughness that is higher than its mana value, right? That's another interesting way to use this, because you're guaranteed not going to kill your own commander, right? If your commander is in black and is, I would say, fairly highly costed, because you do want to get a fair amount of creatures with this, it does cost 6, but also has a toughness higher than its mana value, because this is going to give the minus equal to its mana value, so your commander will survive. I think that's another interesting way to use this card. Next up at 18, we got Elminster's Simulacrum. 4 blue, instant. For each opponent, you create a token that's a copy of up to 1 target creature that player controls. This is a great card in a commander game, right? It's 6 mana, that's kind of a lot. It's instant speed though, which I really, really like. A lot of decks can fit this in there because they're probably going to leave lots of mana open for other reasons. Hint, hint, you're playing blue. And then just at instant speed, being able to create a token copy of all of your opponent's best creatures is pretty darn good value, I think, for 6 mana. Coming in at number 17, I really love this card, Fraying Line. 4 mana artifact. When Fraying Line enters the battlefield, put a rope counter on target creature you control. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player may pay 2. If they do, they put a rope counter on a creature they control. Otherwise, exile Fraying Line and each creature without a rope counter on it. Then remove all rope counters from all creatures. This is such a fun, interesting card. I had to read it through a few times. I'm sure a lot of people did. First time I read it through, I'm like, huh, what? Why would you want to do that? I don't get it, right? So first of all, this is a colorless board wipe, which is great. This is a colorless option for exiling all creatures, which in itself, I think makes it a must include on lists like this. But also they're doing it in a really fun, interesting way, right? So when I play this card, I'm going to put a rope counter on a creature I control, and it's going to be obviously the creature I want to keep. Right? So I put it on my commander, for example. Then it's going to go to the next player's turn. They can pay 2 and put a counter on a creature they control. If they don't, all creatures get exiled except for my creature with the rope counter on it. So it becomes a Dune Blast. That's pretty fantastic for 4 mana and colorless, right? However, I'm giving them the option. So now they can if they want to, but now maybe I'm tying up their mana a little, so I don't know if they love that. If you think about it this way, it gives the player a really interesting dilemma to deal with, where maybe I don't want to pay because I want the board wipe, right? The board's getting out of control. I want all those creatures exiled. That's fine. That's a win for us because, again, it's a Dune Blast. We get to keep our creature and the rest are all gone. Maybe they have a creature they really want, so they want to pay the 2, but they have to think, when is this going to end, right? That's another thing that's interesting about this card. Is the next guy going to pay? What about the next one? What about the next one? Am I going to have to keep paying 2 mana every turn? Is this going to be locking down my mana a little bit? Maybe I just want to keep my 1 creature, and then if it comes back around to me again, I'll refuse to pay. There's just so much going on here. I love cards like this in a commander game. Again, just the fact that it is a colorless board wipe, I think makes it a very playable card in the format. And a lot of decks that might have trouble dealing with creatures are going to want to play it, but I love the politics angle here. The sort of, you got to make your opponents think about it. I love cards like that. The format needs more cards that are going to make people think and maybe have to make some really tough decisions. Coming in at number 16, Illithid Harvester, but it's also an adventure, which I will get to first. Plant tadpoles, X, blue, sorcery, adventure, tap X target creatures. They don't untap during their controller's next untap step. That's a pretty handy ability. And then of course it will exile itself, and then you can cast the other side, which is the Illithid Harvester 4 and a blue horror. 4/4, when Illithid Harvester enters the battlefield, turn any number of target tapped non-token creatures face down. They're 2/2 horror creatures. I really like that ability. I am a big fan of Ixodron. I've mentioned that card on my channel a few times because what it does is it can lock out your opponent's commanders or their other creatures, right? And they won't have access to them because they're face down. If they have no way to flip it back up, it's stuck face down until they can have it die, go back to the command zone and cast it again. This is another option here. And this is not turning all creatures face down. It's only turning certain creatures face down. Obviously, they got to be tapped, so you got to plan around this a little. The adventure side helps a lot there. But again, I just really like options like this for shutting off your opponent's commander in particular. Coming in at number 15, El Toral's Survivors. 3 and a red, Tiefling Peasant, 0/4, Trample, and Myriad. That's right, they brought back the Myriad mechanic in this set. As long as El Toral's Survivors is attacking, it gets +X/+O, where X is the number of lands defending player controls. So this is one of those cards that I don't know what deck it necessarily fits in, but it certainly could go in any deck because it's fantastic, right? If your opponents all have 7 lands, let's say, you attack with this, of course it's going to create that token copy for all of your other opponents, and they're all going to be 7/4 tramplers. And the original one, the original copy of this, you're going to throw it at an opponent that doesn't really have any big blockers, right? The other opponents you don't care about. You can just fire those token copies at them. Whatever damage gets through, great. You make sure the guy you're actually attacking with this doesn't have any creatures with power 4 or greater, and you can keep doing this over and over every single turn. Punishing your opponents for the number of lands that they control is also pretty great. Just a really fantastic creature all around. I don't think it fits in any particular theme, but it could pretty much go in any deck. Next up at 14, we got Mirror of Life Trapping, and this is a really fun one. I always love the fun, interesting artifact cards, right? The colorless ones that can go in any deck. 4 mana artifact. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it was cast, exile it, then return all other permanent cards exiled with Mirror of Life Trapping to the battlefield under their owner's control. Man, this is going to cause some crazy chaos in a commander game, I think. This has a very similar effect to Portcullis, a card that I mentioned in one of my earlier 10 cards videos. Not the exact same, but similar in the way that you can do it. One of the neat things you can do with Portcullis is when a creature enters the battlefield, like say your Eternal Witness, you will get the ETB effect and then it will get exiled. So it's really great in an ETB strategy. Same with Mirror of Life Trapping, right? This is whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it was cast, exile it. So again, I'm casting my Eternal Witness, it ETBs, the trigger goes on the stack, and then it gets exiled, and I get that ETB effect, even though my Eternal Witness is exiled. And then the next person who casts a creature, right? Because again, this is all players, this isn't just you. Your next opponent plays a creature, it gets exiled, your Eternal Witness comes back, and you get the ETB again. So that's one great way to use this card. I'm sure there's a bunch. This is one of those cards that, because it's doing something very unique and interesting, I'm sure there's a lot of really interesting ways to use it. I love cards like this in the Commander format. Coming in at number 13, Barroom Brawl, and this is the only green card that I have on this list. I'm not sure if that means green isn't very good in this set or what, but looked at all the cards. This is the only green one that I added to the list. It is a really interesting card though. 1 and a green sorcery, target creature you control, fights target creature and opponent to your left controls. Then that player may copy this spell and may choose new targets for the copy. This is such a fun, interesting card in a commander game. That's why I mentioned it. So you're going to choose a creature controlled by the opponent to the left of you, right? Next in turn order, essentially. And you're going to pick a creature to fight. And obviously it's going to be a creature you want to get off the board. But then that player gets to copy this spell. But again, they're going to choose the person to their left. So in next turn order. So what happens is this can keep going round and round the board, right? This can actually get back around to you, and then you can use it again, because every time someone uses it, they may copy copy it and do it to the person to their left. I mean, obviously the flavor here is fantastic. Barroom Brawl, I love it. Such a fun, interesting card in a commander game. Great flavor. Maybe sometimes it'll just fizzle. You'll use it once and your opponent won't want to use it and that'll be it. Okay, still, I think it can be a really fun, interesting card in a commander game. I like it a lot. Coming in at number 12, Altar of Baal. 1 and a black artifact, but again, has that adventure. So Bone Offering, 2 and a black sorcery, create a tapped 4/1 black skeleton creature token with menace. Okay, that's all right. Then it's going to get exiled and you can cast the artifact side, which is why I'm talking about this card. So it is an artifact and you can pay 2 and a black and tap it. Exile a creature you control. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. I had to read this card a few times because I was like, this can't be that good, can it? Like, I must be reading it wrong. You can exile, like obviously the token you just created, you can exile. You can exile any other tokens right now in any deck, and there's tons of decks out there like this. You can just start exiling the worthless tokens that you just have lying around and replacing them with creatures from your graveyard every turn. That's a really great effect, and it can go in a ton of decks. I for sure have at least one that this can go in very easily. It is just a reusable recursion effect. That is great in a commander game. Coming in at number 11, Wild Magic Surge. Red and a red instant. And buckle up for this one. Destroy target permanent opponent controls. Wow, that's great, especially in mono red, am I right? However, in classic red fashion, its controller reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a permanent card that shares a card type with that permanent. They put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of their library in random order. So this card essentially is a Tybalt's Trickery and a Chaos Warp combined into one. I mean, I think that's a pretty fair comparison. The most important part of this card, though, it is destroying a target permanent, and I say it all the time, being able to hit any permanent on the battlefield is so important in a commander game because you never know what your opponents are going to be doing. You can hit a creature with this, you can hit a land, you can hit, most importantly, an enchantment, and that's why this card absolutely has to get a mention and is absolutely going to see play. It is a red card that is going to deal with enchantments, and of course red does not deal with those very well at all. You're going to give your opponent another enchantment though, right? It should be worth it though, I think. If your opponent has a Ristic Study on the board, that's probably the best enchantment in their deck. So if you destroy it and they reveal cards until they reveal another enchantment, they're probably going to get something that's not nearly as good. Almost assuredly, right? Smothering Ties, same thing. Any of those really powerful enchantment effects that if you're in a mono red deck or even in like an Izzet deck or maybe a Rakdos deck where you just have a heck of a time getting those super annoying enchantments off the battlefield, chances are your opponent's not going to get something better than their Smothering Tithe or their Ristic Study or whatever the case may be. Having those options can be really important in a red deck. This card's absolutely got to get a mention. Getting into the top 10, Robe of the Archmagi, 2 and a blue artifact equipment. When equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, draw that many cards. Oh boy. And again, the magic phrase there being draw that many. So the more damage you deal, the more cards you draw. It has equipped 4, that's kind of a lot, but has also equipped Shaman, Warlock, or Wizard 1, and that's a lot of creature types. Again, if you're just thinking about your commander, that's a lot of creature types. You just think about a Niv Mizzet, okay? Niv Mizzet is a wizard, also has evasion. You put this on there, you connect with your Niv Mizzet, you draw 5 cards, that's incredible. Now, I haven't gone through the whole list of Shamans, Warlocks, or Wizards that you can connect this to in blue, just talking about the commanders, but I'm sure there's a bunch. And then on top of that, you don't really need to do that, right? Just I equip this to any of my creatures and I connect with them and draw a ton of cards. Man, this is a great card draw engine. Coming in at number 9, Black Market Connections, 2 and a black enchantment. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, choose 1 or more. Create a treasure token, you lose 1 life. Draw a card, you lose 2 life. Or create a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling, you lose 3 life. So I have a feeling that people are probably going to rank this card a lot higher than I am. It looks really good on its face, and it is. I love modal cards. I love enchantments that just sit there and give you stuff every turn. However, I think the life drain here can be a bit of a trap, right? I know people will look at this and say, oh, well, I can get all 3 of these every single turn. Yeah, but you're losing 6 life. That is has a lot of life to be losing on every turn. I talk about this with Mana Crypt. That's one of those cards that people just think, why not put it in your deck if you can? But I can't count how many times I've seen people play that on turn 1, and then it ends up doing them like 15 damage over the course of a game. That's a lot of damage, right? Greed is a factor here, I think, with this one for sure, which I guess is a very black theme to have. Thematically, this card's great, of course. Flavor-wise, it's great. It is a fantastic card. That's why I have it on my list. It's definitely going to see tons of play. Just for me personally, I don't rate it higher because I think that it can really suck the life out of you if you get greedy with it. I think there's a lot of people out there that are going to be playing this card and then choosing all 3 modes right away and probably doing it the next turn as well. And now you've just lost 12 life, right? So is it worth it to have lost 12 life to draw 2 cards, create 2 treasure tokens, and get 2 3/2 changelings? You know, I mean, it maybe not. I like the changeling part because now it can go in a tribal theme, so that could be good. I think I would definitely put this card in any black tribal theme because mostly of the changeling ability. Overall, it is a really good card. I just think it can be a little bit of a trap for people. Coming in at number 8, Eldritch Pact, 6 and a black sorcery. Target player draws X cards and loses X life, where X is the number of cards in their graveyard. Ooh, baby. So this card, as soon as I saw it, it reminded me of Peer into the Abyss, right? Which of course is a very similar effect. Lot of mana, gonna draw you a ton of cards, or gonna kill your opponent, right? That's what's great about that card, and what's also great about this card is it is target player. You can use this to just draw a ton of cards if you want to, but if you got an opponent who's playing a graveyard deck and they got 40 cards in their graveyard, you can just use this to straight up kill them. That is why I really like this card a lot, right? Having cards like this in the format I think is funny, in particular this one, because now everyone out there playing a graveyard deck is going to have to be cautious that someone has Eldritch Pact in their deck and can just straight up kill them with it if they cast it. But of course, if that's not the case, then you can just use it on yourself. I actually don't think I would play this if I was playing a graveyard deck, because again, you would just risk killing yourself. I think I'm going to play this in a black deck that actually isn't necessarily a graveyard deck. Like 7 mana, I draw 20 cards and lose 20 life. That seems pretty good, especially later in the game, maybe, but then maybe your life's a little lower. It's a tough one. You know, you got to be careful with it for sure. It can be a huge payoff, obviously, but it's a risk. Coming in at number 7, Displacer Kitten, 3 and a blue, cat beast, 2/2. And this is another one that I had to read a couple of times to make sure that I wasn't missing something. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. That's crazy amazing. Like this is a fantastic blink effect, okay? Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, I mean, that's going to happen a whole bunch. If you're in a blinking deck, you can now cast your non-creature spell that blinks and then get an extra trigger on top of it to blink something else. However, where this card I think is particularly good and why I have it ranked so high on this list is because it is blinking non-land permanents. And let me tell you, as someone who has made a lot of blink decks, finding cards that will blink things that aren't creatures is actually pretty rare. There is not a lot of cards out there that will blink non-creature things. So for example, let's look at a Saga deck. That is where I think this is a fantastic fit if you're doing that. Obviously, Sagas are non-creature spells, so when you cast one, you can blink another one that you have in play already, and it will come back into play, reset, right? It's not going to have any counters on it. When it enters the battlefield, you'll get the chapter 1, and then you'll restart again. So a fantastic fit in a deck like that. This is a very unique card with a very unique effect, and I think it's going to see a ton of play. Next up, we have Nautilus Ship, and again, another colorless card with a very unique, interesting effect. I love cards like this in the Commander format. It's a 4 mana vehicle, flying 5/5. When it enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard. So if I didn't know anything else about this card, that's pretty good. Okay, a 5/5 flying vehicle, and it's graveyard hate. I say it all the time. You absolutely need graveyard hate if you're playing a Commander deck, or the graveyard deck will just run you over. I promise you. Make sure you have graveyard hate in your Commander decks. However, on top of that, whenever Nautilus Ship deals combat damage to a player, you may put a creature card exiled with Nautilus Ship onto the battlefield under your control. That's amazing. And it has crew 3. You could put this card in any deck. And not only is it going to hate on the graveyard decks, you don't even have to hate on a graveyard deck. You can just hate on any deck. Your opponent's playing a creature heavy deck and they got 3 or 4 creatures in their graveyard. You exile their graveyard, and then now you get to steal all their creatures while you're swinging with your 5/5 flyer. Crew 3 is not that bad if you have a commander with a power of 3 3, right? Any commander out there with a power of 3 that you don't plan on attacking with or tapping or blocking, it's just going to sit there and maybe you're using its a static ability or whatever. This is a great include. Just throw it in there. Your commander can now crew this and you can start stealing your opponent's creatures, putting them onto the battlefield under your control, on top of the fact that this fits great in any deck where you maybe are in a steal theme, where you want to be stealing your opponent's stuff, controlling the stuff that they own, you know, those kind of scenarios. This card is fantastic. I'm going to put it in a couple of decks, I think. Coming in at number 5, the best red card from the set, in my opinion, Baylor, 3 red demon 5/5 with flying. Whenever Baylor attacks or dies, choose one or more. Each mode must target a different player, and there are 3 modes. So before I get to the modes, whenever this attacks, I can now choose all 3 modes for all 3 of my different opponents. And you will probably be wanting to do so. So first mode, target opponent draws 3 cards, then discards 3 cards at random. So that one is a little bit like, okay, well, why would I want my opponent to do that? Discarding cards at random, I got to tell you, I hate it, right? I had a Zerzoth deck. I actually took the deck apart because I just can't stand discarding cards at random. I have a card in my hand that I really want, and then I randomly discard it. No, my blasphemous act. I actually needed that. It can be really brutal for your opponents if you force them to discard cards at random. They're pitching their win cons and stuff into the graveyard, the removal, whatever the case may be. That is actually a really good ability. The second one, target opponent sacrifices a non-token artifact. How is there ever going to be a situation where you don't have an opponent with at least one non-token artifact, right? They can't sacrifice a treasure token to this. It's got to be a non-token artifact. At the very least, you're going to be getting rid of one of their mana rocks. And then the last one, Baylor deals damage to target opponent equal to the number of cards in their hand. Those are all fantastic. I don't know if you're ever going to want to do not all 3, maybe if you don't have 3 opponents, but every time this guy attacks or dies, you get to pick one of these awful things to do to each of your opponents. This guy is amazing. Coming in at number 4, another artifact. I always rank my colorless cards a lot higher on these lists because they can go in every deck. Campfire. And I know a lot of people are going to think I'm crazy for putting this so high on the list because a lot of people are probably not mentioning this card at all. But for someone who builds a lot of underwhelming commanders, this card is very important. 1 mana artifact. Pay 1 and tap. You gain 2 life. That's okay, I guess. The important part here, though, is pay 2 mana and tap. Exile Campfire. Put all commanders you own from the command zone and from your graveyard into your hand. Then shuffle your graveyard into your library. Man, I love that ability. I just talked about this back in January, I believe. I made a video called 3 cards the commander format needs. And one of the cards was a colorless option to put your commander from the command zone into your hand. I really think the format needed more options for that. This is doing that. It's a little bit different. The one I made was a mana rock. This one gains you 2 life. That's okay. I mean, it's not going to be useless. Up until now, we only had Command Beacon as the colorless option for doing that. Now we have other options. This is doing a whole bunch of other stuff as well, right? It can actually get your commanders you own from the command zone. So if you have 2 partners, you can get them both. If they're in your graveyard, you can get them out of there and put them back in your hand, right? So if they die, you can just let them go to your graveyard, put them back in your hand. Also shuffles your graveyard into your library. So it's doing that as well. This card is doing a lot. But again, the most important part, in my opinion, is giving players another option to put their commander from the command zone into their hand, which for a lot of underwhelming commanders like Phage or Hakon, it's really nice to see these options. Again, I have in a Name as One deck, which I got to get into my hand before I cast it. It's nice to see another option here. All those Myojins that just came out, right? The old Myojins and the new Myojins, again, are ones that you want to be casting from your hand. So this is just a great card that I love to see in a commander set for all of those super underwhelming commanders that you really need to have in your hand in order to use them properly. Love it. Coming in at number 3, Battle Angels of Tyr. 2 white Angel Knight 4/4 with flying and myriad. Whenever Battle Angels of Tyr deals combat damage to a player, which is not very difficult because it has flying, draw a card if that player has more cards in hand than each other player. Then you create a treasure token if that player controls more lands than each other player. Then you gain 3 life if that player has more life than each other player. So if this card didn't have myriad, it would be a really good card. Because it has flying, it has the evasion, you could just pick the player. For example, if you wanted to draw a card, you pick the player who has the most cards in hand, you attack them, you get to draw a card. If you want the treasure token, you can pick the player with the most lands, which is probably not going to be you because you're in white, and then you'll get a treasure token, right? So even without the myriad, this is still a great card, but because it has the myriad, it's a phenomenal card. So when you attack, you're going to create those token copies that are hitting your other opponents. And if you're not the player that fits any of these categories, right? If you don't have the most cards in hand, you don't have the most lands, and you don't have the most life, you will get all three of these. Draw a card, gain 3 life, get a treasure token. That's phenomenal value on top of the fact that you're hitting your opponents for damage, right? Let's not forget about that. This is a great card. Again, it's one of those cards where you just put in any white deck, right? I mean, I don't know if there's a specific deck this fits in, maybe Angel or Knight Tribal, I guess, to make this even better in those decks, but this just goes in every deck. And I know I've really gone hard on the whole white card draw thing. This is another one. I know people disagree with me, but I think in due time, I will be proven right. And of course, to put the cherry on the sundae of this white card draw discussion, getting to my number 2 card, Archivist of Augma, 1 and a white, halfling cleric 2/2 with flash. Whenever an opponent searches their library, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So I already made a video about this. A lot of people didn't like it. Again, I think I am right. I do think they went a little too far. Now, keep in mind, guys, we just had a set, New Capenna, come out where from my count, there was 10 repeatable mono white card draw effects. 10. That's a lot. All of those cards have not yet saturated into the format. And then we have a few more, the 2 I just mentioned, and there's a couple other as well that are really great white card draw effects. That is a whole lot of white card draw injected into the format very suddenly. And I know people think, oh, white really needs it. I don't think they do. Like I said, I've been taking Endless Atlas out of my mono white decks because I don't need it anymore, even though that's a pretty good card draw effect. Definitely don't need it after these 2 cards. I mean, come on, guys. If I put 7 or 8 mono white card draw effects, repeatable card draw effects in my deck, you don't think that's too much? I mean, you got Esper Sentinel, Welcoming Vampire. We have all the ones that already exist. You could easily put 10 mono white repeatable card draw effects in your mono white deck. That's pretty darn good, don't you think? Now, have they gone too far? Only time will tell. Like I said, a lot of these cards have just come out. They haven't saturated into the format yet. So we have yet to see. I think this card's going to go in an absolute ton of decks. I was really shocked at the comments where people were talking about how, oh, well, people don't search that much. It's meta dependent. Meta dependent? Cultivate is like the 4th most popular card in the entire format. So I don't know. I mean, I think searching happens all the time. I commented on that video that after doing a lot of gameplay editing, which I've been doing on my channel, obviously, I didn't even realize how much it happened. And I think a lot of people don't. I think you guys don't actually realize how much searching really goes on in the game. It happens all the time. Having to edit out all the searching and shuffling involved in a game takes out like 60% of the game. I'm not even kidding. It happens a lot. It's not just Green doing the ramping, right? Everyone plays Wayfarer's Bauble, Solemn Simulacrum, Burnished Heart. These cards are all over the place, and that is on top of all the tutoring that happens as well. I promise you, this card is going to go in a ton of decks. And again, that was a little bit of my complaining. It wasn't so much about the card draw so much. It was, this is like Smothering Tithe because it's just going to go in every deck. No, it's not as powerful as Smothering Tithe. I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is a white card that, yes, white gets card draw, but so does every other color combination. This card can go in any deck that has white. You could put this in a 5-color deck, right? That's sort of my issue with it, is it's another white card that is just going to go in every deck. And as I talked about in my What White Does Best video, that's not the solution. The solution to making white better in the format is not giving white cards that can now go in every deck. We saw how it worked with Smothering Tithe. That's not the solution. That being said, this is a really great card, right? I have it number 2 on this list because it's fantastic. It's going to see a ton of play in the format. I see that it is already relatively expensive. For me, yes, I'm going to probably buy a couple copies of this card. And I don't know, again, I could probably put this in 6 or 7 decks. All my white decks, all my decks that have white, definitely goes in both my mono white decks for sure. Hopefully I can afford it without going broke. I'm actually shocked how much pushback I got on that video because I thought people were going to be more on board with the fact that this is just, you know, this is a really powerful effect. Drawing a card every time someone searches their library, man, that's really good. But coming in at number 1 is Deep Gnome Terramancer. 1 and a white, gnome, wizard, 2/2, has flash, And whenever one or more lands enters the battlefield under an opponent's control without being played, you may search your library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Do this only once each turn. So this is number one on this list, not because it's my favorite card from the set, but it's definitely going to be the most played card from the set, I think. I didn't think they would outdo themselves with Archivist of Augma, but they did. I think it says something that the top 3 cards on this list are all white cards. We just got a whole ton from the last set. Again, I hate to keep coming back to this, but I just think they went too far with this card. So first, let's get into the ability, okay? Whenever one or more lands enter the battlefield under an opponent's control without being played. So for those who don't know, there is some distinction between a land entering the battlefield and it being played. Playing a land means you're playing your land for turn. That's what that means. So typically you play one land on your turn, right? That's your land for turn, as they say. You're playing it. So when you play your land for turn, that will not trigger this, obviously. If you have an effect that says you can play more than one land per turn, same thing. So if you're allowed to play 2 lands per turn, you can play 2 lands and that will not trigger this as well because you are playing those lands. But everything else is up for grabs, right? So for example, I think the simplest way for this card to be very useful is with fetch lands, right? Any kind of fetch land, whether you have the really expensive traditional ones or the evolving wilds or the new ones from New Capenna that go get lands for you. You're going to play your land for turn, which is the fetch land, and then when you go get another land, you're putting it into play, but it isn't the land that you've played. That will trigger this. And you get to go get a plains out of your library and put it onto the battlefield tapped. That is really, really good. Any ramp spell whatsoever is going to go get you a plains out of your library and put it onto the battlefield tapped. I think this card is too good. This is going to be the next Smothering Tithe, in my opinion. I know people think I'm crazy for saying that, but I don't know how we didn't learn our lesson from Smothering Tithe. I've been saying this for over a year now. Smothering Tithe and cards like it are not the answer. That's just a card that goes in every deck. And this is a card that just goes in every deck. I think that the mistake that they made here is that it doesn't have the typical if your opponent has more lands than you clause. They didn't put this on here. I think this is a color pie break, in my opinion, because that's what white always does. This will allow you to get more lands than what your opponent has. If they crack that evolving wilds and they go get a land and put it into play, if you have more lands than them, doesn't matter. You get to go get a plains card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Now, in a mono white deck, people might think, oh, no big deal. That's great. Yay, white gets lands. But this goes in all the decks, guys. This is the problem with cards like this. I know people think I'm crazy for speaking out against these sort of effects, but it's not the mono white decks you got to worry about. It's all the other decks. Nobody is complaining about a Smothering Tithe in a mono white deck. They're complaining about it in every other deck. That's why you have to be careful making cards like this. And I know people will look at this and go, just like with Archivist of Augma, and say, oh, well, it's a creature. It's easily removed. So what? You only need 1 land off of this. It's a rampant growth. This is 1 and a white rampant growth. This is a white instant speed rampant growth. You hold it in your hand, and because it has flash, that makes it even better, of course. Wait till your opponent cracks that fetch land. In response, you throw it in play, and you've just now cast a white rampant growth at instant speed. You don't need a bunch of lands off of this. You only need 1 land to make this a very playable card. Anything other than that is just gravy, right? Yeah, do this only once each turn. So what? That's not really going to hurt you at all. And then on top of that, you can play into this effect. You can cast a Path to Exile exile your opponent's creature, and when they go get a land, you get to get a land as well. And like I've been saying for over a year now, this is not the answer to print really busted white cards, because then they're just going to go in every deck, and of course it's going to increase the price, right? If we just look at cards like Smothering Tithe, Smuggler's Share, which came out in New Capenna, now we have Archivist of Augma and Deep Known Terramancer. If I'm making a mono white deck, I'm a casual player, I want to make a mono white deck, yay, I have all these great white cards that now I can make it so that white is better at card draw and ramp. Guess what? I probably just spent almost $200 just for those 4 cards to put them in my deck. Is that the answer? Is that the answer to help white, right? If that's what we're actually talking about here, and people keep screaming this, gotta help white, white sucks so bad in the format, is that the answer? Is printing a card that's probably going to be $40 or $50 going to be the answer for helping white? I don't think that it is. This is a fantastic card. I think it's going to go in a ton of decks. decks. That's why I have it at number 1. People are going to be playing like crazy. It's probably going to be super expensive. I don't think this was needed, right? Just like the more card draw I didn't think was needed, I didn't think we needed the more ramp either. We already have Archaeomancer's Map and Keeper of the Accord, fantastic white ramp cards that are going to get you to parity, right? That's what white is supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be getting you to the same amount of lands everyone else has. That's a great way for you to ramp and catch up to everyone else without breaking the color pie. I think this card is breaking the color pie in my opinion. Your opponent can have 1 land and you can have 10 and you'll still get a card off of this. I think that's a bit much. But again, the big issue for me here is that this is just going to go in all of the decks, right? For all of the people talking about how white needs ramp and card draw and stuff, okay, but does Kenrith need it? Does Edgar Markov need it? Are you going to be really, really happy to see your opponent put this card in their Teysa Karlov deck or their Kaikar Wins Fury deck? Really powerful commanders, really powerful decks that did not need this card, but that can now use it. That's the issue here. This card should have cost 3 white mana. White, white, white. That would have ensured that it only gets played in mono white decks, maybe 2 color decks. I also think a 3 casting cost would have been a little bit more fair. I have said it a million times and I will say it one final time. Making really busted mono white cards is not the answer because everyone else can play it as well. Disagree with me in the comments if you want to. I'm sure I'm going to hear a lot of it. Again, as someone who plays tons of white and mono white decks, I'm not super excited about this card because everyone's going to play it. If I'm wrong, I will be happy that I am, right? If Deep Gnome Terramancer or Archivist of Augma, either of those cards is not very popular in the format for whatever reason, I'm be happy. I'm going to be thrilled. I really, really am. There has been situations where I thought, oh man, this card's great, but it's going to be super popular, so I'm probably not going to be able to play it or afford it or whatever. And that wasn't the case, and I was very happy that that was the turnout. I don't think that's the case here. I think both of these cards are going to be really popular in the format. But that is it. That is all. That's my top 20 cards from Battle for Baldur's Gate. For Commander, did I miss anything? I don't know. Maybe I did. I find that there's always at least one card that slips under the radar for me whenever I do these lists. All the ones I mentioned, though, are fantastic and I think are for sure going to see tons in play. I usually do a combination of cards that I think are really interesting and fit in certain archetypes or solve problems like Campfire, but also cards that I think are just going to see a lot of play and are certainly going to be in the format a ton. As a Commander set, that should be every card here. I think there's a lot of cards in this set that aren't going to see a ton of play. Overall, it's a pretty good set. If I get 20 really good cards out of a set for Commander, even if it's a Commander set or not, 20 good cards, I'm happy with that. I'm happy to get 20 really good, interesting cards from a set for this format. I also will point out I do not include Commanders on this list. I do the Commanders separately, so I will be doing that list right away as well. But what did I miss? If I missed anything that you guys think is great from this set, let me know in the comments below. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.